It's now time for our main event with your host, Chris Tetrold Blaine. Welcome to Once Upon a Turnbuckle.
Hi again, everyone, and welcome to another special edition of Once Upon a Turnbuckle. And I get to do a little bit of another 1-2 here, which I've done before when it comes to wrestling books, when I've been able to speak to two guys that have been involved in the same book. I get to kind of do the same again here. So a few weeks ago, we had one half of the dream team on that produced this work of art there. There we go. Look at that in stereo. The man himself, Brian Blair, on very memorable episode, and I'm thrilled to welcome his partner in crime, as it were, journalist, author, biographer, Ian Douglas. Welcome to the show, mate.
Appreciate being here, Chris. Fortunately, no actual crimes were committed during the writing of the book that I'm aware of.
Just whatever had occurred beforehand, which you got to write about. So
yeah, well, there were a few of those. But,
yeah. Let's sort of leave them on the page.
I believe the statute of limitations has elapsed on those.
Thank God, because then we finally got to hear about them in here. This is absolutely. I start like I did with Brian. Really, I cannot praise this book enough, and I can't. I have been. Since I read it, it's one of those where I could not put it down.
I'm glad you enjoyed it. It was really written. Well, fortunately, since I'm writing from a wrestling fan's perspective, and I've seen some wrestling books that were written by non-wrestling fans, and I think it shows that I'm able to help structure it in the format to where if I picked it up cold and I had no familiarity with the subject matter, I'm crafting the very sort of narrative that would make it difficult for me to put it down. So I'm very happy to hear that.
There you go. And we'll delve into the kind of the technical side behind it. As I said, sort of we're both writers. I'm very, very interested in that side of things, particularly when it comes to wrestling writing. So we'll go further down in the book in a bit. But really sort of to kick off, to lay a bit of groundwork, I suppose, on your work today, because it's not just wrestling writing. You do sports writing and for some well-known publications as well. Men's Health is up there.
Men's Health is one of them, yes.
Yeah. So how did let's wind it back to when your writing journey began. Was it something you always wanted to do, or something that you kind of stumbled across?
Oh, brother. It's one of those things where you're going through school, you think that you're a good student, and then you start having certain ideas reflected back toward you where you're not necessarily getting praise for your performance on your calculus exams or any of your AP bio exam, but your writing instructors, your English instructors are telling you, hey, there's something to your work here that is rare, at least among students that I interact with on a high school level. So you might want to consider this. And that's really where the germ of the idea of doing something creative with writing began, is simply by having that idea reinforced along the way that you're better than most. Now, better than most may just mean that you're better than 1 in 10 at a certain level. But if you're the only one that leverages that into a creative career and you learn from your mistakes, hopefully you learn from other people's mistakes, and you also learn from your successes. Hopefully there are some of those as well. You can take it quite far, and also look to see where your areas of expertise overlap. You may be better than 90 writers out of 100. There may still be 9 out of 100 that are better than you are, but those 9 may not be as well versed or steeped in wrestling lore and history as you are. So that creates an opportunity for you as well.
Was it, when you started writing, was wrestling always on the horizon for you? Is it something you always wanted to get into?
Man, the answer to that question has to be no. And it's because when I was growing up anyway, not that it was all that long ago, but I understood that Dave Meltzer and Wade Keller and those sorts of guys are out there, but you have no idea how you're going to develop the sort of contact list that those guys have, how you'd get involved in it, how you'd make a living doing it. And I was in college at the University of Michigan, where I came across the Death Valley Driver Review Board, and I start seeing guys like Dean Rasmussen, Phil Schneider, and I see these guys with these very entertaining reviews and commentaries on pro wrestling. And you know, it's inspirational, and you begin to think, man, it would be nice if I could just write something that could turn all of this investment in professional wrestling as a fan to leverage that investment in some way, so that it isn't so much of a one-way street.
I like that. Yeah, I really like that.
Yeah,
I have similar thoughts myself. You know, sort of letting some kind of a cat out of the bag. It's something that's way off yet. I've started work on. I've written novels in the past, so I'm working on the first kind of what could be termed non-fiction thing, and it's more my experience as a wrestling fan, exactly what along the lines of what you suggested there. And I think, yeah, dedicating so much of your life to it, there's got to be something more you can get out of it rather than just sort of sitting and watching it or attending shows and things like that. So I'm fully on board with that.
Yeah, you get to you get to reclassify all of that fandom as research in an instant. And it's a marvelous feeling that you can go back to your parents, your ex-girlfriends, or whoever told you were wasting your time watching this trash, and say, look, it was all to my creative and professional benefit. That's one of the best feelings I've ever had.
I can finally, I should hopefully one day have something I can take to my wife then and fully justify why I wasted my time with it. But, cool. So you're let's kind of segue into the wrestling side in particular, since obviously one of the reasons we're here. As a fan, where did your wrestling journey begin? What year was it? What was it that hooked you in?
The first time I ever watched professional wrestling, I'm sure it was intriguing, but it was just in bits and pieces. I was aware of who Hulk Hogan was. I grew up in a post collapse of Detroit big time wrestling environment, so I didn't know who the Sheik was. Occasionally I'd hear Dick the Bruiser referenced because there was the WWA NWA war that took place in Detroit in a prior generation. But I had no understanding of that. When I first heard of wrestling, it was Hulk Hogan and Roddy Piper. But the first time I ever gained control of the television and a remote control long enough to catch a match, it would have been right around 1986 and 87. And the first pro wrestler I ever saw, I'm sure it was an episode of Wrestling Superstars, or Wrestling Challenge. It was Macho Man Randy Savage. And seeing him come down to the ring in the colorful outfit as the Intercontinental Champion and drop an elbow on a guy off the top rope, I was hooked from that very moment.
That's cool. And so many I've spoken to, actually a similar age range, I suppose, even though I was it took me a few more years before I really discovered what it was. But Randy Savage, I think he stood out. I mean, there was larger than life characters. Hulk Hogan, the Warrior was soon to come out as well. But I think Randy Savage was the one I feel that was flamboyant enough, but still kept it grounded as a person. He didn't become a comic book character. Brilliant. No. And I've heard you say as well that you, in a previous interview, that you then were dropping elbows on your stuffed animals. I was doing exactly the same. Yeah.
The Lorax in particular, I brutalized that poor guy. I think substantial. One of the underrated elements to wrestling fandom back then is, hypothetically, let's postulate a person whose family is never a child whose family is never going to spring for a pay-per-view event, who is never going to allow them to watch Saturday night's main event because you can never get control of the remote control in prime time. Yeah. And in fact, you don't even have cable. Well, the only champion you may have gotten an opportunity to watch wrestle on syndicated television back then was probably the Intercontinental Champion, because Hogan wasn't doing Wrestling Challenge and Wrestling Superstar. So for me in that period, Savage was the champ because he was the only guy I ever got an opportunity to see wrestle with the gold.
That's fair. I grew up with, so it was 91 when I decided to go on my own journey. I kind of knew about it through an older cousin, probably a year or so before that. Hulk Hogan was rammed down my throat pretty much. You know, it was either Hogan or the Warrior, and I ended up with everything Hulk Hogan, where compared to a few of the others, I thought he was quite dull. You know, honest opinion, I don't think he was that exciting to watch. So it was the smaller guys that I gravitated to, like Savage. Unfortunately, at that point, I think Randy Savage had started to get to the end of his WWF in-ring stint. So I didn't get to experience that, you know, that sort of late 80s. I mean, was there particular moments of his that really sort of sucked you in, apart from his look and everything and the dropping of the elbow? Is there any like angles and that you remember that really did kind of stick with you back then?
I think we can't overrate the realism element and the fact that as a 6, 7, 8-year-old child, when I first had my introduction to wrestling and to Savage, I thought it was real. I thought it was a legitimate athletic contest. You couldn't have told me any different, no matter how aggressively you attempted to do so.
Yeah.
And Savage, when Savage was a heel, I didn't care. He was my guy. If Hogan beat him, I said, well, of course Hogan beat him. He's got him outweighed by 70 pounds. I still viewed Savage as the underdog. Well, of course Savage is going to rake his face and wrap tape around his throat. I'd do the same thing if a guy outweighed me like that. I viewed it as a bullying element, where Hogan's the bully beating up on the younger guy, beating up on the smaller guys on the roster, and I'd like to see somebody get one over on it.
That's a good take on it. I like that.
Yeah. So, you know, by the time it got to be 91, 92, and they start working the angle with Ric Flair and Miss Elizabeth, I took that personally as well.
Job done though on their part. That's kind of what you're meant to be feeling like. So
absolutely, I was properly enraged and wanted to see Flair get his comeuppance.
That was one of the first sort of the main kind of events, I think, around the time that I first got into it, WrestleMania 8, and the angle was very, very personal. You know, when you're bringing someone's wife into it, I hadn't really seen that before. You know, in the early years. It's a great way to get under your skin, isn't it?
Yeah, and decades later, when you hear that elements of that angle may have contributed to the legitimate downfall of the marriage, then I begin to feel a little bit guilty and uncomfortable with my fandom.
Yes, and we saw that again, you know, later on with Benoit and Sullivan, and you know, leave your personal life at home if you can. It's very difficult when you're both into it, I suppose. It's are you kind of, did you keep up with it still, or are you sort of more of an old school fan?
Less so than I used to. I think that I can't speak for everyone. I think you tend to have a special admiration for the wrestlers who are older than you, and maybe one or two that you can look at as members of your peer group. Like, I'm 42 years old now, and I look at someone like Samoa Joe as being roughly the same age range, and that's sort of the cutoff where the inner crotchety old man begins to kick in and says, "Okay, I'm not going to cheer for any of these young whippersnappers." But also, I think wrestling has. Speaking of my inner crotchety old man, I think that wrestling has drifted away from the mathematics that contribute to the pinfall, the the equation that results in a pinfall. I think they've drifted away from that. And we spoke a little bit earlier about boxing, so I'll use an example. Nigel Benn and Chris Eubank. If Chris Eubank catches Nigel Benn with a haymaker and drops him, and Nigel Benn beats the count just barely, Eubank doesn't need to catch Nigel Benn with 3 more haymakers, even heavier than the one that dropped him, in order to finish him off. He's more susceptible to something that wouldn't have put him away if he was caught with it earlier in the fight. Yeah. But wrestling is now drifted into the territory where, you know, a DDT doesn't finish a guy, so now I need to drape his legs over the top rope and hit him with the DDT. Oh, that doesn't work. Now I need to brainbuster him off the top rope, and that doesn't work for me, unfortunately.
That's I know. I hear it. I don't watch it. People who listen to me regularly probably get sick of me saying that. I don't watch it. I haven't done for about 15, 20 years. What I have seen of it, you can certainly tell how planned. You know, people can say it's always been scripted. Fair enough. Can't get away from that. Certain elements of it anyway. But the whole thing now looks like it's been sat down, gone through move by move, and they've lined up all the spots they want to do, and they're just literally moving from one to the other. There's no story in between.
Right. And I had a recent conversation with Steve Kern, who and I think you'll appreciate where he's coming from. He said that the way he approached matches, ideally, if someone's covering you within the first 2 minutes of a bout, you should be kicking out before the 1 count. You know, with beyond 5 minutes, maybe the ref is able to hit the mat once and you kick out. 10 minutes in, maybe you start registering early in the 2 count. 15 minutes in, you're kicking out later in the 2 count. He said in a match, if you're kicking out at 2, 1 minute into the match, and then 45 minutes later you're still kicking out at 2, the audience should be wondering, wait a minute, everything that happened between the first minute and the 45th minute was BS because it didn't register any additional time on the count. This is nonsense.
And that makes complete sense. It's I was listening to one of the podcasts recently. I can't think, because I've been listening to 2 main ones. Jake Roberts is a guy that I could listen to all day long. I think his promos were the best. Even his stories are the best. It may have been his, or it may have been Jeff Jarrett's. One of them did say the art of the rest hold. You know, an armbar, a chin lock, or whatever. You would have a guy back in the day holding those down for, you know, a minute or so. They then became a certain point in the industry where the fans would chant boring. But what they were doing, which I never thought about like this, is they were giving the announcers the chance to get them over. You know, they gave them a chance where they could slow it down and talk about them, where rather than just calling each move that they're doing one consecutively, the one after the other. And, you know, so many, I think the lost art of old school wrestling, which I loved, I'm starting to realize how much of it is gone now.
Yeah. That makes total sense.
Yeah, just for all these little things where, back in the day, I probably thought these guys who wrestled slower were, you know, less exciting to watch. But it's like there were heels I hated, but now I respect them like any of them because of what they did. They did their job, but they made the hero look good, which I think is even better than making yourself look good, you know, really.
Oh, certainly. Yeah. And I mean, the rest hold, the announcer is offering a commentary on it. He can be explaining how Roberts is softening up the head and neck area to make his opponent more susceptible to the DDT and the short arm clothesline when he finally gets them in. But yeah, it is helping the audience to understand. And unfortunately, it's devolved into, man, I hate to sound like I hate to sound like someone who listens to Cornette nonstop, which I don't, although I certainly find him entertaining. But yes, it's devolved into someone can get dropped on their head 15 times consecutively, and it still doesn't register a 3 count.
No. Are these guys superhuman? You know, you mentioned the DDT not being enough. Nobody used to land a DDT like Jake Roberts or Arn Anderson, it was enough, and you believed it. That these guys weren't going to get up, and then it just became a bypass move. It just became something that, yeah, someone's going to get straight up. Or again, I think I've heard Jake Roberts say it just shows they didn't do it as good as I did.
There you go.
Right. Anyway, let's kind of steer it back to your work. We're going down a bit of a rabbit hole here, which is great. Let's bring it in line with the start of your wrestling writing. Then I believe it started with a book that you did with the Beast Dan Severn. Unless
we can start there, but I would say the first time I was ever able to write about wrestling and actually call it productive work was when I was a graduate student reporter at Northwestern University, and I got to cover the Windy City Wrestling promotion in Chicago. And there was a show where this would be 2005. There was a show where Abyss and AJ Styles and Larry Zbyszko showed up. Wow. and got to wrestle there. And that was the first time I was ever able to write about professional wrestling in a professional context and get credited for it.
Okay.
So beyond that, the very reason I was able to get in contact with Dan Severn and position myself to help him with this book is because one of my writing gigs was in helping with search engine optimization, blog-based content for the State Games of Michigan organization, the West Michigan Sports Commission. And at that point, I'd already worked in the fitness industry. And one of the people who I got to interview and shoot with was Kurt Angle on multiple occasions. I got to take the double-decker megabus from Detroit, Michigan to Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, then catch a cab to Kurt Angle's house.
Wow.
He answered the door, got to go down to the basement and watch as he finished up his leg presses, and then I conducted an interview with horrible cinematography as he talked about the piece of fitness equipment that we made, the handheld rotating free weight known as a burn machine. I didn't name it. Don't blame me for that.
No, that's fine.
But we got him talking about that on camera. I was able to interview him later when I worked for a real estate tech company in San Francisco. And then, so once I got in this position with the State Games of Michigan, I was able to interview Kurt again to talk about what he considers to be an optimal true amateur wrestling workout. And his workouts were, of course, absolutely barbaric and insane. And
I can imagine.
And from there, I was able to go to Taz and say, hey, Taz, I did this interview with Kurt with respect to wrestling. Would you be willing to talk to me about judo workouts? And Taz agreed, but he said it all had to be done via email, which was fine. From there, I was able to talk to Diamond Dallas Page about yoga training. And I'm not sure if I was able to interview another wrestler at that point prior to Dan Severn, but I was able to then pitch Dan Severn and say, let's talk about combat sports workouts.
Wow.
And Severn lives in Coldwater, Michigan. It's about, there's no really easy way to get there from Detroit. It's about a 2-hour drive.
Okay.
But I was able to get Dan Severn on the phone. We spoke for about an hour and a half. I really only needed to speak with him for 15 to 20 minutes. And at the conclusion of that discussion, I told myself, man, if he's that effusive with the information, then if I was able to get him on the phone maybe 12 or 13 additional times, we might have enough content for a book. And during a subsequent discussion, Dan said that he wanted to work on a book. And I said, well, if you're willing to give me about an hour of your time every day for 2 weeks, we can probably get a book written. And the end result of that was Realest Guy in the Room. Yeah, I think that's what we called it. Yes, the realest guy in the room, Life and Times of Dan Severn.
That's an amazing story, really. To sort of how that came about. I mean, that's answered a lot of other questions I probably could have thrown at you. But sort of working your way through guys like Kurt Angle and Taz. I mean, was something like that, again, going back to similar to a previous question, I suppose, was something like that on the horizon? Did you want to get to the point that you could help one of these wrestlers, one of these stars, to get their story out there?
I can't say I have a story I can tell you. I'm not going to tell you the full story because I don't want to get in trouble. There was a potential opportunity in 2010 where I might have been able to contribute to the autobiography of a very, very famous Detroit-based boxer. And that deal came off the table at the last moment because even though that boxer was going to be paid very well for his story, he turned to me and asked me how much I was willing to pay him for the right to be his co-author, because it would do wonders for my writing career, which at that point was non-existent. I was strictly a business person at that point and wasn't even thinking about writing.
Okay.
So it was a nice fantasy. Writing a book with someone was a nice fantasy for about 2 days until the subject of the potential book began asking me how much money I was prepared to kick back to him. Obviously, that opportunity came off the table. So no, I wasn't really thinking about it until my interaction with Dan Severn.
Okay, it's always, I've read countless numbers of wrestling biographies. It's always fascinated me, especially when there is another writer involved. So look at your role then. So you just let us into on about 14 hours or so, two weeks, conversing with Dan Severn to get his story out. So obviously, tell us just talk through how that works for you. So you obviously you're having these conversations with him. What do you do then with the raw material? It can't be as simple as you re-listen to it and you literally jot everything down. You've got to pull out the stuff you know is you can't be putting everything in. Am I wrong?
You cannot put everything in. Not everything. This gets into another area, but this is fine. I really need to go here in order to suitably answer your question.
Sure.
When you are a co-author, it's my belief. Not every wrestler, I know that not every wrestling co-author shares this belief. It's my belief that you have to be a responsible steward of the information that's being shared with you, and that you have a responsibility to look out for the legacy of the individual who's sharing their story. And so as an example of that, the person you're working with may have a set of 10 wrestling ring rat groupie stories that they're well aware will reliably pop the boys every time they tell those stories at the bar.
Right.
And they omit nothing in the telling of those stories. And if you were to tell all of those stories in that person's autobiography, which is intended to immortalize them, they'll be entertaining, and you may set things up to the extent where you turn off a sizable portion of the fans who have an interest in this book, and you also set it up to where the only thing that will ever be remembered about the book is how salacious it was. And you're actually doing a disservice to that wrestler if you allowed all of those stories to be told. So do you maybe allow 1.5 to 2 of those stories to be told and tone it down a bit, just so that the fan understands that this person, how thick the presence of ring rats was during that period of time, and how plentiful those opportunities to engage with ring rats were during that period. Yes, you hit those points and you move on to other material. You don't need to degrade the book. Does that make sense?
Absolutely, yeah, absolutely. And I can think of some of the ones I've read before, because you kind of see the ones that are, say, they're written by the person that they're about. You know, there's no mention of co-authoring and things like that. Do you think it's important sometimes for there to be that independent person sort of aiding the story along, rather than giving someone, here you go, here's a book full of blank pages, fill them with whatever is in your head?
Yes. Sometimes people have political opinions, and I'm not referring to Brian, who has had a political career. I'm not referring just to him. I'm referring to, frankly, everyone I've been involved in a book with. They have their political opinions. Those opinions may be near and dear to you, and maybe you want to encapsulate them in some way where you talk about your general life philosophy, and maybe you can get those points across in a way that's palatable to a broader cross-section of the readership. But the majority of wrestling fans who are purchasing the book of a professional wrestler, they're not going to be all that interested in the political beliefs or religious beliefs of the wrestler, to the extent that they want to read 20 or 30 pages of it in a 300-page book. Now, with that being said, I worked on the book of Bugsy McGraw, who's a devout Christian, and so am I. I'm not trying to distance myself from this. The point I want to make is that's a very important and significant part of his life. He devoted, I think, 2.5 total pages to such content in his book, which I think is around 320 pages. And then I'll read in a review where somebody said, "Well, it was good until he got all Jesus-y." Okay. No, it's 2.5 pages. Like for some people, their tolerance for that is so minimal that for some people, any reference is too much. I had another reviewer of Bugsy McGraw's book just recently who gave it 1 out of 5 stars on Amazon, and then said, well, he did something to do with the fact that he was what's the word I'm looking for? Let's just say he didn't side with dissenters in the Vietnam War. This is a statement. He didn't dwell on it, and the person said, the second I saw that, I closed the book, got rid of it, and gave it 1 star. Well, okay. Well, you didn't get to the other 319 or however many pages, and it's unfortunate because that's not really what the essence of the book is about.
No. I think 1-star reviews, I think they can do as much good as they can bad. I think it's always disappointing to get them, I suppose, but then it can sort of direct your readership base, based on those, because again, if they're so explicit that there's 1 or 2 particular things in there, someone can see that and say, actually, well, it can't be all that bad, because actually I wouldn't be put off by that. I'm going to go read it, if they're in 2 minds. So, you're not going to please everyone, are you?
It's impossible. Sometimes one allusion to a thing that they're vehemently against is all it takes for them to shut the book and chalk up the 1-star review.
It almost leaves their review pointless because, you know, if it's based on, if you're saying you've only got like 10 pages in, well, I've put down plenty of books halfway through and picked them back up again and realized actually, you know, I needn't have put it down in the first place, because you got to take it as a whole product before you can cast an opinion on it.
Right.
My opinion. But
of course, I agree with that opinion. Like if the person made it through the entire book and said, look, Bugsy's story was tremendous. I don't necessarily agree with this one opinion.
Yeah.
And on that basis, I give it 4 stars instead of 5 stars or 3 stars. At least finish the book.
Quite.
I mean, I don't want to go around telling people not to be sensitive to certain things. I'm sure there's something out there that I'm sensitive to, but I would implore those people to at least finish the book before you commit what amounts to ratings vandalism.
Quite, and some people are out there just to do that anyway. But just staying with the Dan Severn book, just for one moment.
I'm so sorry to be jumping all over the place.
No, that is, again, anyone who's seen any amount of my shows knows that we don't follow a linear route at all. I don't really like to do that. Obviously as a wrestler, as an athlete, very, very well respected in a number of fields, because he is, obviously, he's in UFC. He did very, very well there. He was, amateur wrestling background. He was the NWA champion. Still at a point, I would say, even though it wasn't at the forefront like it used to be, it was still very well respected. The guys who held that title were still, of a certain level. Then he got to WWE. It didn't really seem, that was when I knew of him, but then obviously when he got to WWE, I don't feel like we were given a fair shake of who he was. Is there a reflection in from your discussions with him? How did he feel about his stint there that comes out in the book?
I think he was, well, just to take things back just a little bit, Dan viewed everything. He's a consummate professional. He views everything as a job. And if he was being paid, he went out and did whatever was required of him by his employer at the time. If it was, and I don't recall the exact number of fights he had while he was employed by the WWF at the time. I think it was 10. That overlapped with what he was doing in the wrestling ring, and I believe his record during those 10 fights was something like 8-0-2. So if you can imagine just taking all of the bumps during a pro wrestling match, taking 2 days to recover from that, going to some promotion without a proper training camp, and engaging in a 3-round MMA, or in this case, no holds barred contest, and then coming back 2 days later and continuing to take bumps in a pro wrestling context, that would be unfathomable today. And it's something he did 10 times during the course of his year with the World Wrestling Federation. But to answer your question, Dan viewed it very much as a job. He was willing to do whatever was asked of him. And that speaks a bit to the missed opportunities that were there, because he was the National Wrestling Alliance World Heavyweight Champion at the time. And when I asked him, because they had a bit of a feud between Dan and Owen Hart while he was there. And I asked him, in fact, they even had Owen appear as his opponent at an NWA show during that period. They allowed Owen to make an appearance. And I asked Dan, would you have been willing to drop the NWA championship to Owen in an NWA ring or a WWF ring during that time? And he said, oh, absolutely. And I'm sure the NWA probably would have approved of it if they felt it would help get them over and the championship over. But it never happened. And then Dan, of course, says that Vince Russo came to him with the idea that we're going to put 666 on your forehead. So you're going to be, that's the mark of the beast, and you're going to be the beast as a member of the ministry. And Dan said, I'm absolutely not doing that. I have to go back to small town America. And I've been to Coldwater, and that's an accurate reflection of what Coldwater is. I'm going to have to go to small town America, where some people don't necessarily understand what's going on in a pro wrestling context. And they're not going to be very receptive to this. And so, no, I'm not going to do that.
That very reflective of the fact that I've always held the opinion as well. It's unfortunate he went into the WWF when he did. In the midst of the Attitude Era, it's like they were making a gimmick of everyone, and he was so he didn't need a gimmick. But that's perfect indication then, I think, of them having to give a character to someone who really could have out wrestled most of the guys on the roster, but they didn't want to focus on that. They just had to make it sensationalist, didn't they?
Well, the only guy on the roster who he objectively did not out wrestle at one point in time was Dr. Death Steve Williams, who beat him during the NCAA championship tournament during his senior year, where they both wound up as All-American wrestlers, so that was fine. But aside from that, I mean, Dan beat Kurt Angle one-on-one in an amateur wrestling contest. Wow. Of course, this is before Kurt Angle was at the caliber he would become. But yeah, Dan was every bit the world-class amateur wrestler that he was presented as. And if you think about what it would be like now to get an active reigning, at the time Dan was the NWA Super Fight champion, reigning Super Fight champion, which sort of became the heavyweight championship. So if you think about what it would be like to get a reigning UFC champion in a WWE ring these days, and what sort of response that would get now, it's just a shame how dismissively it was treated during that era.
It was treated like it just, they did not take it seriously. I mean, when they tried to do the NWA crossover, I think it was the beginning of '98 with Jeff Jarrett and Barry Windham and the Rock and Roll Express, they just poked fun at it, and it's almost like, again, my opinion's spewing out now, but it's almost like Vince just looked at it and it's like, they used, almost ran you out of business once. I'm here to prove that we are still the bigger dog, and you are very, very much a small fish in my big pond. And it needless, they could have had something really good there, the same when they brought Severn into it.
Yeah, and if you think about the casting and the way they attempted to portray it, it really didn't work, because on the one hand, you branded it as this hyper traditional wrestling presentation, almost like Southern fried. Here's a WWF version of the Midnight Express, where it's sort of goofy, and here's Jeff Jarrett straight out of a Memphis wrestling sort of presentation. But then all of a sudden, here's the UFC champion who can rip anyone to shreds. Like that doesn't work.
No. That doesn't work. No, they didn't know what they were doing with it. Anyway, let's bring it back to.
So sorry.
No, don't worry. No. I'm not. It's not digging at you. I'm just, there's so much that I wanted to sort of cover. I didn't realize we were going to go down so many rabbit holes. So truth be told,
back to Brian. Yes.
Back to Brian. Obviously, he's had his own show. We've spoken about this before, but he's such a great guy. It's such a good book. I wanted to kind of discuss from your point of view working with this. How did this one come about? Because obviously, so you by this point you had three wrestling biographies out there: Dan Severn, Hornswoggle, and Bugsy McGraw. Mm-hmm. So how did the prospect of working with Brian come about?
Well, some of this information is second and third hand, but my understanding of it, well, here's what happened from my perspective. Kenny Casanova, very good friend of mine, who has contributed to many professional wrestling biographies and autobiographies. Kenny messaged me, as he did with Bugsy McGraw's book, and asked if I would have any interest in working with Brian Blair on his autobiography. And I said, sure, love to. What's the story with it? And he said, well, his writer, the guy who's actively working on the autobiography with him, is looking for an opportunity to unload it. He's looking to do it respectfully and find another writer.
Okay.
And I said, sure, I'm interested. I'd already spoken with Brian multiple times. Once, I am half Bahamian. The first professional wrestling event I ever attended was at in Nassau Stadium when I was visiting my uncles. Dusty Rhodes was wrestling.
Yeah.
Fred Tugboat Typhoon Ottman in the main event in a last man standing match when he was known as Big Steel Man.
Okay.
And I've been working on a book on the history of professional wrestling in the Bahamas for years at this point.
Right.
I now have all of the information, so it's just a matter of finding the time to sit down and write it, which
That's cool.
frankly has been very tough to set aside.
You've been quite busy. I will let you off.
It's fortunate and it's unfortunate at the same time, honestly. Yeah. But I'd spoken with Brian about with respect to that project, and also Brian wrote the afterword to Bugsy McGraw's book.
Okay.
So I got on the phone with the writer who had been working on Brian's book. He assured me there was nothing at all wrong. He was having difficulty getting Brian booked on occasion, and it was taking too long, and he had some other projects he wanted to work on. So I said, okay, that's fine. I can set aside some time to work on this. Let me talk to Brian. I got Brian on the phone, and he assured me that I would have no trouble with his availability. And I said, well, if that's the case, let's talk 3 times a week for several months, because we don't need to be in any screaming hurry to get this done. And after 3 or 4 months of speaking 3 times a week, we had the bulk of what would eventually become Truth Be Told, Brian's autobiography. It's just unfortunate, but this frequently happens as you're writing an autobiography, as someone's life story is continuing to unfold.
Yeah.
We had always intended to conclude the autobiography with with a reference to Paul Orndorff and a visit that Brian had paid to Paul Orndorff when he was struggling with illness in Brian's capacity as president of the Cauliflower Alley Club. It just so happened that as we were wrapping up, Brian texted me to let me know that Paul Orndorff was on the verge of passing away. So we were going to have to rework the ending. Right. And it also just so happens that the day after we finalized the epilogue, that Brian approved the epilogue, and I thought we were completely finished, that Brian sent the text message informing Lee that his eldest son, Brett, had been found murdered. And of course, we had to include a second epilogue. And I told Brian if he wanted to completely scrap the book, shelve the book, whatever he wanted to do, I was okay with it at that point, because who am I to tell him what the proper response is when his son just got murdered?
Well, quite. Yeah, it's nothing that any parent should have to go through, is it? So you've almost just, I mean, what I loved about the book, I guess, is that it was, as a wrestling fan, you know, I got to live through an era that I've come to love in late, you know, my later years. It's not one that I lived through. It's one that I can go back to and find out more about because of stories like his. But alongside, like you say, his life is still happening. You still get indications of, particularly near the end, that he's still battling, you know, hypothetically, you know, outside the ring, you know, with his health and with things like that, you know, close ones to him dying and whatever. These stories don't end. You know, he probably could have another one come out, you know, in years to come, because he's got that much to tell.
Certainly. When you think about his role with the Cauliflower Alley Club, as we're having our discussions, he might start a phone call off with, "Hey, Ian, like Brickhouse Brown just died, so I'm going to have to cut this short because I'm going to have to talk to some people about this. Kamala just passed away. This is devastating to me because I was so close with him." Or even when I went to visit him down in Tampa, and we're riding around, and he's asking me if I could send some text messages through his phone while we're riding around. So I'm firing off messages to Medusa, and I'm helping him track down Wendy Richter's phone number. And I'm helping him get everything set up for a podcast interview that he needs to do. And then we need to run over to Steve Kern's house because Kern doesn't know how to set up his new iPhone properly. And as I'm in the midst of setting it up, a call comes in and it flashes up on the screen, Ted DiBiase. and so once I'm finishing helping him get set up a ringtone, I'm like, "Hey, by the way, it says that Ted DiBiase called, but I don't know if it's junior or senior." And he just chuckled and said, "Senior, definitely. Junior doesn't call me."
I think you could almost one day you could write your story about writing their stories. You the kind of things that you can kind of live through with them.
I almost feel like that would be a bit of a betrayal. It's not that there's any sort of attorney-client confidentiality, so to speak, but telling the full backstory, that may be of interest to some people, but there's some behind the scenes information that doesn't need to be shared.
That's fair enough. I think it's it's a situation just like you described just then. It's something you probably didn't set out to experience, and nothing that any other wrestling fan would. In the course of one journey, kind of thing. It's fantastic.
Oh, sure. And you also have to consider it from the standpoint that if I wanted to, certainly if opportunities presented themselves and time was permitting, I would certainly entertain the idea of working with another wrestler in the future on their autobiography. In fact, I'm working with a wrestler on his autobiography right now. I can't divulge whose project it is, but it is in progress. And if I put myself in the wrestler's shoes and a potential co-authoring prospect was known to divulge all of the behind the scenes information and put out his own 400-page work, just spilling his guts about all aspects of every project he worked on. That's not the guy I want to work with, thinking that it's going to be fodder it's going to be for public disclosure and public consumption one day.
It's like becoming it's always like being a member of the paparazzi or the tabloid press, isn't it? When it gets to that kind of level, it's tattle, as they call it. I'm not sure.
Yeah, if you want to maintain your level of respect and you want people to talk to you, you have to be able to keep certain things under wraps
and stick to the subject. Fair enough.
Absolutely.
Yeah, that's cool. Listen, Ian, I'm going to have to start wrapping it up because I know you're a very, very busy man. Just a couple of more questions, just sort of kind of quick fire ones, I suppose, that I just want to run by you.
Sure.
From a writing perspective, the obvious one, I guess, is there anyone's book out there? I know you said you're working on someone's at the moment, but is there, if you had a choice to write anyone's story, whether they're still with us or whether it's sort of posthumously telling their story, is there anyone in particular you would want to sort of delve into and represent?
Randy Savage would be number one. Jumbo Tsuruta would be number two.
Okay.
Ricky Choshu would be number three. Savage and Tsuruta, of course, no longer with us. And Ricky Choshu, there'd probably be quite a language barrier there.
Yeah.
Yes, I'm a huge, I was a huge fan of Puroresu, especially the 80s and 90s stuff. And Tsuruta is Saruta remains my choice for the greatest pro wrestler of all time, and Riki Choshu would remain my pick for the most charismatic heavyweight wrestler ever in an era where the fans surrounding him actually believed what they were witnessing was real.
Cool. That's a good picks there. Actually, not ones I would have expected. Fair dues. It is. I guess this one, I don't really know how to word this one. I know what I'm trying to get at. I think from a reader and a fan's point of view, and to take Eric Bischoff's slogan, controversy creates cash. We all gravitate to shocking stories. As a writer, if you're writing, you're, like I say, representing these wrestlers with their stories. Do you have in your head, what any stories that could be a real hook? If there's sort of controversy involved, is that a good thing, or is that something that makes the process a little more difficult?
Oh, brother. Maybe I'm a little too, as I'm attempting to put myself over. I'm truly not. Maybe I'm a little too respectful. I think I just have a bit too much of an aversion to that material. Like if I'm working with you and you're the professional wrestler and you tell me I want this in the book, it's a controversial topic of my career, but I want it in the book, then I'm going to tell you, okay, it's going in. I may have some suggestions for you as to how it should be framed and treated, but it's going in the book. I think I'm the sort of content curator who errs toward, let's think about what it means to immortalize yourself, so that when your grandchildren and great-grandchildren, if you have any, go back and want to get inside the head of their great-grandfather or great-grandmother and understand the essence of who and what they are, they're not left hoping that grandma or grandpa could have been a far better person. Okay.
Yeah. That's a quality
answer. And also, with respect to controversy creating cash, that is, I'm sure that's undoubtedly true, but there are other objectives than simply book sales and generating dollars in these instances. I think more about the immortalization component and the fact that 100 years from now, someone will be able to pick up Bugsy McGraw's book and be able to read respectful reminiscences from his wrestling career without a bunch of smut. And I think that would be important to him.
Cool. I'll frame that answer. That's really good. Thank you for that. I don't know. I won't put my own opinion out there too much, but that could well be the difference between having a guy like you involved to kind of steer it down, making sure that it tells the right story, rather than just having someone who's got their own power and, being paid by someone to put their story out there because they know it will shock and it will sell. Definitely. So cool. Yeah. Final question then, really putting yourself back in your wrestling fans' shoes to close off. Is there a moment in wrestling that you've witnessed, either, through your lifetime on screen or even in person, that's made you proud to say you're a wrestling fan?
That made me proud to say I was a wrestling fan.
Or you can even go the other way if you want an answer out there to say this one that makes you regret it. But
I can think of something specific. I mean, fortunately or unfortunately, this has to do with my Puroresu fandom. But years ago, when I was a pool coordinator and a lifeguard trainer at the Southfield Sports Arena back in the Metro Detroit area, I was dealing with I had a group of lifeguards who were on the staff with me who were decidedly non-wrestling fans. Right. And I was able to take a Mitsuharu Misawa Toshiaki Kawada match from 2000. Pop it into the VCR at the sports arena and just let the half-hour match play.
Right.
And people who despised wrestling were sitting down watching it, asking me questions like, is this real? No, this is real. And look at these guys. They're so respected. Look at that audience. This is unbelievable. So for people whose, I mean, you can't even call it fandom, like lack of fandom, the reason I can't say that they would have been wrestling fans one way or another, but for people whose concept of pro wrestling has been distilled through a WWE Attitude Era filter at the time, for them to sit through a 30-minute All Japan Classic and come out asking questions like, is this real? No, this is definitely real, because I can see everything. Yeah. And I can hear everything. I can practically feel everything. Yeah. This is a legitimate athletic contest. That made me very proud to be a wrestling fan in that moment, and to have been a fan of the variety of pro wrestling that I was a fan of.
Cool. I really, really like that. Being able to, suspend. I mean, this is what wrestling does to us all. It makes us suspend our disbelief. But that's a perfect answer to that age-old question. Is this real? It's not animated. Whether they're hurting each other, at some point they do, but whether that move actually hurts them in the way it's being portrayed, maybe not. But what you're seeing, they are actually doing that. Yeah. They're making it look like that has happened.
If they were able to convince viewers of wrestling who were convinced that wrestling was all fake, scripted trash, they were able to convince them that everything they were doing was 100% real and that it was to be respected. That's brilliant. It didn't get any better than that for me.
No,
I felt that my fandom was entirely justified in that moment.
There you go. And it brings us back again to justifying everyone's fandom by having products like this out there that you can go on. So Ian, thank you so much for dropping in. This has been a blast. I've really loved talking to you and sort of finding out more about this whole process. And thanks again for your work. I urge anyone out there to check out Truth Be Told, but also your other books as well, which I will be doing. I'll be going back and checking out, particularly Dan Severn's. You sold that one to me.
Well, how about this? Severn's book, the version available on Amazon, it was a bit of a rush job. It had a lot of typos in it. I'm not proud of that fact. So we'll hop off here. You'll give me your address, and I'll send you the reformatted, remastered, typo-corrected version from my own desk.
Oh my God. That's amazing, mate. Thank you so much. No, I didn't pay him for that, guys. Thank you. No, Ian, this has been a blast. You're welcome back anytime, mate. Good luck with everything you've got going on. Can't wait to hear more about who it is that you're writing for at the moment.
Thanks so much, Chris. I had a lot of fun.
No worries. Take it easy. If you enjoyed this episode, please take a moment to like, share, and hit the subscribe button. Also follow us on Facebook and Instagram to keep updated about all future shows.